In the rolling hills of medieval Italy, where towering castles cast long shadows over bustling villages, there was a woman who was years ahead of her time, a woman whose name was whispered among the great minds of her era, but whose legacy was nearly lost to history. This is the story of Trota of Salerno, an Italian physician from the 11th century whose revolutionary contributions to medicine would shape the way we understand healthcare even today. Imagine this: the 11th century, a time when women were mostly relegated to domestic roles, and their voices, when heard at all, were rarely associated with matters of science or innovation. Yet, Trota was not just a passive observer of the world around her. She was actively shaping it, not in the shadows, but at the very forefront of medical knowledge. But what makes her story so incredible? At a time when few women were allowed to study medicine, Trota not only broke through the barriers of her era, but revolutionized the field for generations to come. She wasn't just a doctor. She was a pioneer, a healer whose work in women's health, gynecology, and obstetrics was groundbreaking, changing the lives of countless women in her time and leaving an indelible mark on medical history. You might wonder, how did she come to wield such influence? How did a woman in the 11th century manage to not only practice medicine, but to do so in a way that changed everything? Well, it's a journey of courage, intelligence, and an unrelenting drive to improve the lives of others, especially women. But the question remains, why does her story still matter to us today? Let's dive into her remarkable life and discover how Trota of Salerno became one of history's unsung heroes. This is a tale that not only reveals the power of one woman's determination, but also offers a glimpse into how far we've come and how much more we can still achieve. Trota's story begins in the ancient city of Salerno, located on the southern coast of Italy. Salerno, during the 11th century, was home to one of the most renowned medical schools in Europe, the Scuola Medica Salernitana. This was a place where the brightest minds gathered to share knowledge, where medical practices and philosophies from across the world collided. And Trota, despite the odds, managed to become one of those bright minds. But how did a woman, at a time when few were granted the privilege of learning, break into this exclusive world? It wasn't by accident. Trota was born into a family where learning was encouraged, and her keen interest in medicine was nurtured. While her peers were focused on traditional roles for women, Trota found herself captivated by the idea of healing. The Scuola Medica Salernitana offered an education open to both men and women, though not many women chose to study there. Those who did were often seen as exceptions. Trota, however, was no exception. She was determined to become a physician, and in a society where the medical field was dominated by men, her resolve to succeed was nothing short of extraordinary. What she accomplished in her time was a testament to her brilliance. Trota became an expert in gynecology and obstetrics, fields that were largely ignored by the male-dominated medical community. She wrote detailed treatises on women's health, exploring everything from menstruation to childbirth, and even devised remedies for a variety of female-specific ailments. It was her work on women's health that set her apart. At a time when women's health was rarely discussed openly, Trota wrote about it with expertise and compassion, offering advice and treatments that would help women lead healthier, fuller lives. But here's where it gets interesting. Her writings were not just passed around locally, they traveled far and wide. They were translated into Latin and eventually became part of medical texts used throughout Europe. Trota's influence spread across borders, reaching other scholars and practitioners who looked to her work for guidance. Her legacy began to grow, though not without resistance. Despite the undeniable impact of her work, Trota's name was later erased from many historical records. Some scholars argue that this erasure was part of a broader pattern of minimizing the contributions of women in history. But here's the twist. The medical community had already absorbed her knowledge, and many of her ideas were incorporated into the work of other physicians, male physicians who took credit for them. But what happened next might shock you. Despite her contributions being overlooked for centuries, the resurgence of interest in historical women's contributions to science in modern times has finally begun to restore her rightful place in history. Trota's influence wasn't just about treating patients, it was about shifting the way people thought about healthcare and the role of women in it. By focusing on women's health in such a detailed, scientific way, she opened doors for generations of female physicians and researchers who would follow in her footsteps. Her story is one of perseverance, of breaking down barriers when it seemed impossible. Now, think about it. How many women today are making a similar impact in fields that were once dominated by men? Just look at the strides women like Marie Curie, the pioneering scientist, or even modern-day leaders like Dr. Megan Neff, a psychologist who advocates for neurodivergent individuals. They too are rewriting history in their own right. But they all stand on the shoulders of women like Trota, who laid the groundwork centuries ago. Trota's life is one that leaves us with as many questions as answers. Despite her monumental contributions to medicine, she did not receive the recognition she deserved during her time, and much of her work was appropriated by male physicians. It's striking that her writings, especially those focused on women's health, were not only ignored for centuries, but also hidden in the shadows of history. Yet, one must ask, what happened to Trota after she laid the foundations of modern gynecology and obstetrics? Trota's name vanished from historical records, but this erasure was not complete. Her influence, albeit obscured, still seeped through the cracks of time. Her writings, initially ignored or suppressed, resurfaced through the centuries, often credited to other physicians. What's most fascinating about Trota is that we don't know exactly when or how she passed away. Some sources suggest she may have died around 1160, but there's no certainty. We also don't know what became of her family. It is believed she may have been married to Giovanni Plateario, a fellow physician, but historical evidence about her personal life remains sparse. What we do know is that the legacy of her work, passed on through the generations, was eventually acknowledged in the modern era, though it came with the painful realization that her name had been all but erased. The absence of detailed records about her life only adds to the intrigue. Trota lived in a time when historical documentation was often incomplete or biased, especially when it came to women. In her case, it's as if her contributions to medicine were too powerful for her gender to allow them to be properly recognized. Yet, the fact that we still know her name today is testament to the persistence of knowledge. It's an interesting thought. How many other women like Trota have shaped our history, only to have their contributions hidden under the weight of social norms? And how many of their stories are still waiting to be rediscovered? In recent years, Trota's work has experienced a revival as scholars seek to unearth the forgotten women of history. Her treatises on women's health have been rediscovered, analysed, and celebrated in academic circles, finally giving her the recognition she deserves. The rediscovery of Trota is not just a reclaiming of her name, it's the reclaiming of the immense contributions that women have made to fields like medicine, which were largely ignored in the past. The resurgence of interest in her work shows us how much is still to be discovered, especially in the realm of history, where many female voices remain silent or suppressed. So, why does Trota's story matter today? Her life reminds us that history is full of stories yet to be told. We must continue to uncover the forgotten contributions of women, especially those who were pioneers in their fields. Trota may have been erased from many records, but her influence has never truly disappeared. Her work laid the foundation for modern medicine, and her legacy is a powerful reminder of the transformative impact that one woman's courage, intelligence, and determination can have. If you've enjoyed uncovering Trota's story and want to dive deeper into more untold histories, this channel is dedicated to shedding light on the forgotten heroes who've shaped our world. Don't forget to subscribe so we can continue bringing these stories back to life. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history.